At long last, we come to an end of an era with this one. Mega Man 6 is often considered by many to be the last hurrah of the classic series before Mega Man 9 came out. It's not only the last Mega Man game to be released for the NES, but it's also one of the last NES games ever made, and it's got quite a lot behind it. According to Wikipedia, Keiji Inafune even stated that a franchise having 6 entries in it is rare, and so it gives the advantage that players expect certain things with each game. Mind you, this was back in 2010 when that wasn't the case, but back in 1993 that was sort of true. Nowadays, it's rarer for a franchise to not reach 6 games, and a lot of the big name titles look at the idea of 6 games being rare and laugh at it. Still, he has a point with the latter part of the statement. Games changing up the formula when there are already 6 games in can often be detrimental to a game's publicity, so it makes a lot of games easier to make as a result. The downside to this, however, is that it risks becoming been there, done that, if there's not a lot to make it stand out. Does Mega Man 6 have that? Well, let's take a look and see for ourselves. So the story of Mega Man 6 is told once again at the start of the game. The first ever tournament between the world's strongest robots is currently ongoing, and everyone is excited, but just when things are going well, the tournament's sponsor, Mr. X, who totally isn't Dr. Wily, has the 8 finalists go haywire and start attacking people.
It's time I tell you the truth. I have been manipulating that fool Wily from the very beginning. I now no longer need that Dr. Wily's help. Come and face my power, Mega Man.
You've been controlling Wily, huh? Yeah, sure you have. Next you're going to tell me that Sheik from Ocarina of Time isn't Princess Zelda in disguise. Anyway, it's up to Mega Man and Rush to stop the madman before he takes over the world. Our Robot Master lineup is an international lineup, and it's actually a pretty good group just from the look of things. First things first, since he's honestly the best choice to start with, let's start with Flame Man, representing the country of Saudi Arabia. One neat little feature is that after you choose a stage, you get a little info on the Robot Master you're going to be fighting, even if it's brief. Flame Man's stage is pretty good, but its music is awesome, especially the OC remix cover called Master of Flame. Flame Man's stage revolves around these pits of oil that you have to cross. The oil slows you down, but that's only minor compared to what it's really there for. Fire enemies are everywhere, and if their attacks touch the oil, said oil ignites and turns it into an insta-kill pit like they were spikes. The main thing you're supposed to do is charge shot these Pooker enemies, which will turn into platforms you can ride when they hit the oil or flames. Flame Man himself is a pretty good fight. He likes to send balls of fire towards you, but he also will jump around and, more commonly, create these pillars of fire that'll actually block your buster shots. Still, I was able to beat him and get his weapon, the Flame Blast. The Flame Blast is a neat little weapon. It'll shoot a fireball that creates one of the pillars of flame that Flame Man used, leaving a trap for certain enemies if you can't hit them. We also get the Rush Power Adapter. Yeah, Rush works differently in this game. Instead of using the Rush Coil or Rush Jet, you instead get 2 adapters that make Rush turn into a weapon for Mega Man to use, which is pretty nifty. The downside is that you can no longer slide when using them since the suits are so bulky, but that's a small price to pay. Next up is Blizzard Man, who represents the nation of Canada. Insert South Park joke here. Sorry, I don't want to deal with copyright problems, and I don't want to take the risk by playing a South Park clip. Blizzard Man's stage is pretty boring. Besides ice physics, the only thing I can remember from the stage is the submarine that will rise and fall and insta-kill water. There are some neat goodies you can get in this part of the stage if you're fast enough, but that's not really much of a challenge. Blizzard Man himself is pretty easy too. He'll only really do 2 attacks. He'll fling snowflakes at you from various directions, or he'll curl up into a ball and attempt to pull you over. That's about it, really. Defeating him nets you the Blizzard attack, a slow but decently strong set of 4 snowflakes that travel forward. It's okay. Oddly enough, when I first did the recording for this episode last year, I accidentally did a dumb and forgot that the Flame Blast was Blizzard Man's weakness, and instead thought it was the weakness of our next Robot Master, Plant Man. But when I recorded the footage this time around, I went back and did things in the right order, so now we can go after him. Plant Man, who represents the nation of Brazil, has a pretty boring stage too, honestly. There really isn't too much to note here, it's just a jungle stage with a base inside. The only things that are really memorable of this stage are his Gorilla Tank mini-boss for how you have to fight him, and the spring sections, which could get annoying at times. Also, some of the water grabs have Gab-Gaios that pop out of them, kind of like the giant fish from the Wily stages in Mega Man 2, even down to the same watercolor. Plant Man himself is also rather pathetic. He's got an easy-to-discern pattern, with the only thing difficult about him being his pedals, which you have to jump over. His pattern consists of putting up a shield, jumping, throwing the shield, running towards you, and then repeating the process over again. Which way he'll jump and the height of the shield are the only things that make him really difficult. Also, despite not being his weakness, he still takes decent damage from the Flame Blast, so yeah, that's a thing. His weapon, meanwhile, is absolutely awful. The Plant Barrier is the worst example of all the shield weapons. It's not really a defensive tool like the Leaf Shield or Skull Barrier, and it's not even much of an offensive shield like the Firestorm or Star Crash. The only thing going for it is that it ignores protection from things like shield attackers, and is also the weakness of our next Robot Master. At least you also get the Jet Adapter for this stage. Plant Man's weapon is actually the weakness of Tomahawk Man, who is the representation of America. Yes, the representation of the US in this game is a stereotype of Native Americans. His stage is pretty cool despite that. It's an awesome representation of the American Southwest with dusty deserts, cacti, and these enemies with revolvers like old cowboys are all seen using. They're even named Colton, and they take 6 shots to take down. Pretty cool, I'd say. What's even better is this part right here, with a beautiful 8-bit sunset that just looks amazing. We really have come a long way with this console, haven't we? This stage is also where you can find the energy balancer, which you get from Proto Man. There's also a second path that you need the power adapter to get through, and using it leads to Tomahawk Man, but so does the other path. That's a new feature for half of the stages in Mega Man 6, and only Mega Man 6. If you take the path that requires one of the adapters, you actually get a bonus where you beat the Robot Master of the stage. This is why I went after Flame Man first, even though Plant Man is arguably easier. Tomahawk Man's boss fight is pretty fun. He'll hop around the stage a lot, but you have 2 things you need to watch out for when he's on the ground. The first is his headdress, which he'll actually sling feathers at you at different speeds. The other is his tomahawk, which arcs upward when he throws it, so you need to time your jump right. He's weak to the Plant Barrier, for some reason, and defeating him nets you the Silver Tomahawk, which flies at a curve, making it a little harder to aim, but very effective if you can aim it properly. You also get the B parts of Beat, and this is why you want to take the alternate path, since 4 of them will lead to parts that let you use Beat. So, you know how there's the idea that Japanese game developers don't think too highly of Americans? Well, I guess the game thinks otherwise because the American robot's weapon is the weakness of the Japanese robot, that being Yamato Man. Well, either that or the game designers are just huge Fire Emblem fans, so went with the logic of Axe, Speed, Spear. Yamato Man's stage is rather unmemorable, sadly. It's just your usual stage, though with 2 notable enemies. The first is this guy, Benkei, who is named after the ancient Japanese warrior who would take his defeated opponent's weapons when he beat them. Sound familiar? And the other is this combination of Gamarn and Gamdayu, who are an optional mini-boss if you take one of the branching paths. Later, there's another choice you have to make when it comes to the path to Yamato Man himself. I like the boss fight room if you take the path that requires the adapters, since it has a window that shows a sunset. Yamato Man's fight revolves around him using one of 2 different attacks with his spear. The first is this jumping attack, where he spins the spear around and shoots 3 spear tips at you. The other has him spin the spear from across the room, shooting a spear tip at you before he runs over and picks it up. He's got a pretty cool fight, honestly. Defeating him earns you the Yamato Spear, which can penetrate through shields. And that's about it for what it can do. It's just a shield-penetrating attack from your buster, though it can be rapid-fired like the needle cannon. Just be careful because it's not nearly as energy efficient. After that is Nightman, who is very special since he and the last Robot Master we're going to fight here have something different about them compared to the other Robot Masters in the series. Much like previous games, there was a contest held for fans to submit their own Robot Masters. However, Nintendo Power in America actually offered to do this for the first time in the West, and Capcom actually chose 2 of the designs from the American contest. Nightman is one of those Robot Masters, and he supposedly represents the United Kingdom. I say supposedly because there's nothing here that really makes you specifically think UK. His stage is pretty fun despite that. There's these bounce pads in one section of the stage that are pretty fun to play around in, even if it becomes kinda hard to hit things. Also, it's a castle. That already makes it cool. Nightman himself is pretty easy, all things considered. He'll sometimes try to jump and land on you, but his only other attack is where he slings his mace at you before it comes back. When he throws his mace is when you're supposed to attack, since that's when his shield is lowered. But you can attack him whenever using the Yamato Spear, so that just kinda feels like a waste. Beating Nightman earns you the Night Crush. It's a boomeranging mace ball. That's it. Well, okay, it does boomerang back by traveling upward, and you can control which direction it goes using the D-pad, so it does have some decent coverage, but still, it's not that impressive. After him is Centaur Man, representing the country of Greece. I think Centaur Man's one of the more underrated robot masters in the series. He's a freaking centaur, and as a mythology fan, I think that's cool on its own. His stage is actually one of the few water levels in the series that isn't bad either. Oh, but that doesn't make sense for Centaur Man, you might say. I say that's wrong because Greece is a nation of a peninsula with a bunch of islands, so it makes perfect sense. Also, Gaijin Goomba theorized that this level was based on Atlantis, which was an idea popularized by Plato. If you haven't seen his videos on Mega Man 6, well, I don't know how you haven't, since they were released like 6 years ago, but check them out because they're really well done. Anyway, Centaur Man's level is alright. I think the most fun part is crossing this room of spikes while the water is upside down and defying gravity. Centaur Man himself is pretty tricky. His sprite is taller than a lot of Robot Masters, so you can't really jump over him. His main ways of attacking are teleporting around in a way that freezes you in place, and firing the shot that splits apart when it hits the opposite wall. It's a pretty decent fight, honestly. When you beat him, you get the Centaur Flash, which is a sort of quicker but easier to overestimate gravity hold. You can rapid fire it, but that'll just waste your energy, so you really need to be careful with it. And if you took all the secret paths, you get Beat, who functions just like he did in Mega Man 5. Our final Robot Master for the NES is Windman, who represents China and was the other Robot Master designed during the Nintendo Power Robot Master contest. In fact, if you look at the American box art from Mega Man 6, Windman and Nightman are right there on the cover. Windman's stage is... There's really nothing here that's very interesting. There are these fans that'll push you up or down when you're in a column with them, but that's not very interesting. Windman himself isn't that interesting either. He'll float around, push you, pull you, throw these green things, but none of this is really that interesting. Honestly, he's just bland. His weapon isn't even that inspiring. The Windstorm is literally just the bubble lead but reskinned. It doesn't even have any cool bonuses. Well, okay, if you hit an enemy with the attack, when they die, they're sent flying up into the sky, so I guess that's something. After that, you get access to the Mr. X stages, and no, they're still not that memorable. The bosses aren't even that good in these stages either. Once you get to the end, you fight Mr. X, who is in a giant wrecking ball called the X Crusher that you hit repeatedly. But then when you beat him, it turns out that, gasp, Mr. X was Wily the whole time! Okay, seriously, who honestly thought that they were different people when they first played this game, because it's one of the worst fake villains that the series has done yet. I mean, at least Wily tried to pin the blame on other real people, or real as far as we know, since the comics are the only ones that acknowledge Mr. X was a real person. Anyway, we have more stages to fight through. Joy. Again, nothing really of note comes from the Wily stages. It's like I said, they all start to blend together after a while. Originally I was gonna have a game where I show you 2 Wily stages from different games and try to see if you can guess which ones they're from, and then have a trick question at the end. But I decided against that. The Wily machine, of course, awaits us when we get to the end, and this one might be one of the tougher Wily machines. The arc it takes when it jumps in both forms can be hard to tell at times, so you're often going to be crushed, which thankfully isn't instant death. It also doesn't help that the floor will move you around, so trying to get solid footing to hit it without getting hit yourself is not very easy. And then comes the Wily capsule, which you can take out pretty easily with the Silver Tomahawk, thanks to the curve that it has. I will say that I do like the music for this fight, since it sounds like a memorial to all the fights that Mega Man has had to go through on the NES games. After the fight is over, however, Wily begs for mercy, and this time he finally gets put in prison. No secret escape, no technique that lets him get away. Wily's just thrown behind bars where he belongs, and I'm sure that some people would say that's too good for him, but at the end of the day, the world is once again at peace. Overall, Mega Man 6 is a good final farewell to the NES, both for the franchise and for the NES itself. It's an underrated game and it deserves more attention than some people are willing to give it. The Robot Master lineup is actually quite an improvement over Mega Man 5's, and it was a lot of fun. That being said, it's still not perfect. There's several moments where I just felt bored playing through certain stages, since they were so uninspired, and the weapon lineup isn't very interesting, especially when some are easily comparable to other weapons made earlier in the series. Still, it's a game worth your money and attention, especially on the Legacy Collection. The fact that this game was made so well, even while Mega Man X was being worked on, should be a testament to how good it is. So now, we say goodbye to the 8-bit era of games, and move on to the last few games on the list, and we'll once again be sticking to the Nintendo consoles as we head for the Super Nintendo with Mega Man 7.
Wily's been locked up. Looks like the emergency plan's going to have to activate. Mega Man. Those worthless scrap bots you faced are nothing compared to what I'm about to give you. Prepare to face your biggest fight yet.